What happens when Hollywood's quiet storm meets the sharpest tongue on daytime television? The moment Jake Gyllenhaal sat across from Sunny Hostin on The View, the air thickened with tension. Not the kind you can see, but the kind you can feel rippling through the room, like static before a lightning strike. The morning was supposed to be ordinary. Another promotion stop for Jake's latest film, a moody psychological thriller where he plays a man losing grip on reality. But as the cameras rolled and the co-hosts settled into their routine banter, something in Sunny Hostin's eyes hinted that this conversation wouldn't follow the script. She leaned forward, hands clasped, and said with that trademark precision, the kind that cuts deeper because it sounds polite, "Jake, you've played so many conflicted men, heroes, villains, broken souls. But there's been talk lately about Hollywood's obsession with glorifying male pain. Some people say it gives men an excuse to be violent, to be detached. Do you think you're contributing to that image?" The audience went still. Not hostile, just waiting. Jake's smile flickered, the kind of reflexive grin actors wear when they're thinking faster than they're speaking. "That's an interesting question," he replied slowly. "But I think there's a difference between portraying something and promoting it. My job isn't to tell people how to behave. It's to show them what people are." Sunny didn't blink. "But don't you think your roles, and the way you're celebrated for them, send a message? You get praised for playing tortured men. Women play broken characters, and they get labeled as unstable. Isn't that a double standard you benefit from?" A quiet gasp rolled through the audience, followed by that uneasy laughter that daytime TV thrives on. The kind that says we can't believe she just said that, but we're glad she did. Jake leaned back, one hand gripping the armrest. He wasn't angry, not yet, but the shift in his posture said he was bracing. "I don't think about my work in those terms," he said carefully. "I'm not responsible for the audience's interpretations. If people are finding excuses in art to justify their behavior, that's a reflection of them, not me." Sunny tilted her head. "But you profit from it. You benefit from that image, don't you?" The audience's laughter died completely this time. For a moment, Jake didn't answer. The lights glared hotter. You could almost hear the hum of the cameras, the faint shuffle of producers behind the scenes wondering if they should cut to commercial. Then Jake exhaled slowly and said, "I don't profit from pain. I tell stories about it. Maybe the problem isn't that we show too much male suffering. Maybe it's that we don't listen when men try to talk about it." It was calm. Too calm. The kind of line that sounds rehearsed but isn't. Sunny's expression didn't soften. "But when women talk about pain," she said, "they get told they're emotional. Dramatic. When men do it, they're brave. Don't you see the imbalance there?" Now Jake laughed, short, incredulous, not amused. "You're not talking about my movies anymore. You're talking about culture. And culture doesn't change because one actor picks a role. It changes when people stop looking for someone to blame for everything they don't like." The audience reacted, a murmur swelling like a rising tide. Whoopi glanced off camera, a silent cue to the producers. But it was too late. The spark had become flame. Sunny pressed on. "But isn't that convenient? You can claim innocence because it's just art. But you do choose the stories you tell. You choose to embody a version of masculinity that people watch and internalize. You can't just shrug and say it's not your problem." Jake's jaw tensed. The camera zoomed in, catching the flicker in his eyes. That cold, momentary flash of defiance that only comes when someone feels cornered. "Maybe," he said, "I pick stories that reflect something real. Something people are afraid to talk about. And maybe you're uncomfortable because those stories don't fit your narrative." The words landed hard. The audience reacted audibly this time. A low rumble of "oh" that filled the studio. Sunny leaned back, smiling tightly. "My narrative?" Jake nodded, voice firm now. "Yeah. You talk about representation and responsibility like art should always serve an agenda. But art isn't activism. It's honesty, even when it's ugly. Especially when it's ugly." The tension was magnetic. The rest of the panel sat frozen. Joy Behar biting her lip, Alyssa Farah Griffin glancing nervously toward the producers. Sunny's voice softened, but her eyes sharpened. "You're very eloquent, Jake. But it sounds a lot like privilege, being able to tell stories without worrying about the consequences." Jake's answer came without hesitation. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just courage." The air cracked like glass. The audience split in two, half clapping, half murmuring in disbelief. And in that moment, The View had transformed into something else entirely. Not a talk show, not a promo stop, but a stage where two worlds collided, the guarded, intellectual calm of an actor dissecting truth, and the righteous, cutting precision of a journalist demanding accountability. Behind the cameras, a producer whispered, "We're trending already." But neither Jake nor Sunny heard. Because for the first time that morning, both had stopped performing and started revealing what they actually believed. The show continues, but something in the air has shifted. That polite daytime rhythm has vanished, replaced by a raw electricity no one can quite control. The audience leans forward, sensing they're watching something unscripted, something real. Jake Gyllenhaal's eyes narrow just slightly, not out of anger but focus. The same look he gives before delivering a climactic monologue on screen. Sunny Hostin, on the other hand, sits poised and unflinching, the faintest glint of challenge in her eyes. Joy Behar breaks the tension first, laughing nervously. "Well," she says, "I think we just got our viral clip for the week." The audience chuckles, but it's strained, uneasy. Whoopi Goldberg raises her hand, trying to steer things back to calm. "Let's take a breath," she says, half to the guests, half to the audience. "We don't need another social media war starting here." But Sunny isn't done. "Whoopi," she says softly, "this isn't a war. It's a conversation, one we should be having." She turns back to Jake. "You said art is honesty. But honesty without accountability can still do damage. Don't you ever wonder who gets hurt when those stories go unchecked?" Jake lets out a low breath. "Every story hurts someone," he says quietly, "because truth isn't comfortable. And if you only tell stories that make people feel good, then you're not telling the truth at all." That lands. The studio falls silent for a beat, until Sunny leans in again. "But you choose whose truth you show. You choose whose pain you humanize." Jake's expression hardens. "You're assuming intent. You think every actor is out here with a social manifesto in their pocket." "I'm just doing my job." Sunny smiles faintly. "Your job gives you a microphone most people will never have. Whether you like it or not, what you say, what you show matters." That line hangs in the air like smoke. The audience claps, but not for applause. It's the reflexive sound of people reacting to moral clarity. Jake glances toward them, his tone dropping lower. "You know what's funny?" he says. "I've played soldiers, psychopaths, journalists, lovers, liars. And the only time people want to question morality is when it's a man showing pain. Maybe that says more about how uncomfortable we are seeing men be vulnerable than anything else." A ripple moves through the crowd. Someone whistles. Sunny folds her hands together, voice calm but cutting. Or maybe it says we're tired of mistaking violence for vulnerability. The words hit Jake like a slow burn. He sits forward, elbows on his knees, staring directly at her. "You really think that's what I do? That I glorify violence?" Sunny doesn't flinch. "I think you make it look poetic." That draws a quiet gasp from the studio. Whoopi sighs audibly. "We're not turning this into a philosophy debate," she mutters. "This is the View, not Harvard." Jake turns slightly toward Whoopi, half smiling. Maybe that's the problem. People stop asking hard questions because it's daytime TV. That earns him laughter and applause, but Sunny doesn't smile. "No," she says softly. "People stop asking hard questions when powerful men make them uncomfortable." The line lands like a dagger. Even Joy's eyes widen a little. Jake shakes his head slowly. "You don't know me, Sunny." "Then tell me," she challenges. "Who are you really when the camera's off?" The question isn't meant for TV anymore. It's personal. Jake hesitates, his voice softer now. Someone who's spent his life trying to understand what makes people break. Sunny leans in. "And what have you learned?" He looks at her, then at the audience. "That we all break. Some just hide it better." For a fleeting second, the studio goes dead quiet. You can almost hear the lights buzzing above them. But Sunny, still unyielding, says, "Then why hide behind art? Why not use your voice to fix what's broken instead of just filming it?" Jake tilts his head. "Because I'm not a politician. I'm an actor. My job isn't to fix people. It's to make them feel." The audience bursts into applause. But Sunny doesn't join in. She takes a slow breath. "That's where we differ, Jake. I believe feelings without action are just indulgence." The applause fades. There's a faint tremor of tension in the air, the kind that comes when truth and pride collide in public. Whoopi steps in again. Okay. I think we need a commercial before this turns into a therapy session." She gestures toward the cameras. "We'll be right back." But the cameras keep rolling for a few more seconds, and in that sliver of unscripted time, Jake leans toward Sunny and says quietly, "You really don't like actors, do you?" Sunny meets his gaze. "I don't like excuses." Cut to commercial. Behind the scenes, the energy is chaos. Producers whisper, publicists fidget, and Jake's manager hovers near the doorway, debating whether to pull him from the segment altogether. Jake paces quietly, face unreadable. Sunny sips water, unbothered. A young producer approaches her, whispering, "That was intense." Sunny just says, "It was honest." Meanwhile, Jake looks at his reflection in the dressing room mirror, the tension in his shoulders visible. "They don't want honesty," he mutters to himself. "They want drama dressed up as truth." When they return from commercial, Whoopi tries to lighten the tone. "We're back with Jake Gyllenhaal," she says, smiling tightly. "We're all good here, right?" The audience laughs, but the undercurrent hasn't gone anywhere. Jake smiles politely, but his eyes don't. "Of course," he says. "We're just having a conversation." Sunny's voice is smooth. "That's what the View is for." "Then let's have one," Jake says, leaning forward. "You keep talking about accountability, Sunny. What about responsibility in journalism? The way you frame things, doesn't that influence how people see others?" The studio reacts instantly, laughter, gasps, applause. The tables have turned. Sunny's smile doesn't waver. "I ask questions. You answer them. That's the deal." Jake nods. But questions can accuse without saying the word guilty. "You know that." Now even Whoopi looks intrigued. "Oh, this just got interesting," she murmurs. Jake continues, voice steady but low. "You think actors shape culture, but so do journalists. You choose which stories to tell, which clips to air, what to emphasize. Isn't that the same power you're criticizing me for having?" Sunny's response is measured, but there's a spark in it. "Except I don't hide behind fiction. What I say is out in the open." Jake's lips curve slightly. "Yeah, but fiction tells the truth people can't face in daylight." The audience bursts into applause again. And for the first time, Sunny looks caught between admiration and irritation. The camera lingers. Two people on opposite sides of a conversation that's become bigger than both of them. In that moment, the studio isn't a set anymore. It's a mirror, reflecting the divide between storytelling and truth, fame and responsibility, art and ethics. Whoopi glances to the producer's booth, mouthing, "Are we still live?" She doesn't get an answer, because everyone, even the crew, is too busy watching the storm unfold. The show continues without missing a beat, but something inside that brightly lit studio feels darker now. Like everyone knows they've crossed into territory daytime television was never built to handle. Jake's voice carries low but sharp, a calm kind of defiance that cuts deeper than shouting. "See, Sunny, the funny thing about truth is, everyone thinks they own it. You, me, the audience. But truth doesn't belong to anyone. It just is." Sunny doesn't blink. That's a convenient way to avoid taking responsibility for it. The audience murmurs again, a low, restless hum. Joy Behar, ever the comedian, tries to lift the mood. "All right, kids, let's not get too existential before noon, okay?" But no one laughs. Jake looks at her briefly, smiles, then turns back to Sunny. "You're smart," he says, tone soft but with an edge. "You know exactly how this works. You ask the tough questions, you stir things up, and you get the headlines tomorrow. But you don't care about truth either. You care about the reaction. That makes the room audibly shift, a mix of gasps and laughter that teeters between admiration and shock." Sunny's smile fades into something tighter. "You think that's what I do?" Jake leans forward, elbows on the table. "Isn't it? You've built a career on calling people out. It's powerful, but it's also addictive." The camera zooms in. Sunny's eyes narrow, but her voice stays even. Addictive is pretending that art doesn't affect the world. Pretending that you can say anything, show anything, and walk away clean. Jake doesn't look away. "You think I walk away clean? You think I don't carry these characters with me? You think it's easy playing broken people, over and over again, until you start losing track of which parts of you are even real anymore." The words hang there. It's raw, a rare crack in the armor. The studio quiets completely. Even Whoopi doesn't interrupt. Sunny studies him for a long second. "Then maybe that's the cost of the privilege you have. You get to explore that darkness safely. Most people don't." Jake sits back, staring at her. "You call it privilege. I call it survival." The tension is thick enough to touch. Joy mutters under her breath, "I need a drink." Whoopi chuckles softly, trying to steady the air. "Look, both of you make good points," she says, turning to Jake. "But when you talk about pain and art and all that, don't you think people see you as part of that machine? The one that profits off of trauma?" Jake nods. "Sure. But if we stop showing it, pretending it doesn't exist, We just make it easier for people to ignore. Art forces people to look. Sunny folds her arms. But art can also desensitize. Jake glances at her. Only if people stop thinking. And that's not on me. That line gets applause. Sunny takes a breath, her tone suddenly more personal. You know, Jake, I've interviewed a lot of actors who say the same thing, that they're just mirrors for society. But mirrors can distort. Sometimes they show people what they want to see, not what's real. Jake tilts his head. Maybe distortion is the only way to show truth. Reality's too sanitized to hit home. The audience reacts with soft s, the sound of a crowd caught between intellect and discomfort. Sunny's voice lowers. You sound like someone trying to justify pain. Jake looks right at her. You sound like someone afraid to feel it. That stops her. The camera catches everything. The flicker in her eyes, the small exhale she tries to disguise as a laugh. For the first time all morning, Sunny Hostin doesn't have an immediate response. The silence stretches just long enough to feel dangerous. Then Whoopi, ever the anchor, leans forward. All right. Before this turns into a therapy session we all need to pay for. Jake, tell us about your movie. Jake laughs under his breath, grateful for the lifeline. It's called Hollow Point, he says, voice steady again. It's about a man who's trying to do the right thing in a world that's constantly testing him. Sunny interjects, quieter now. Sounds familiar. Jake looks at her. It should. The audience bursts into uneasy laughter, half applause, half nervous energy. But behind that tension, something else is happening, something subtler. The clash has become less about disagreement and more about revelation. Jake isn't playing defense anymore. He's showing himself, his doubts, his convictions, his anger at being misunderstood. Sunny, meanwhile, isn't provoking anymore. She's studying him like a case, like she's realizing this man she's challenging isn't a symbol. He's a human being wrestling with his own demons. Whoopi senses the shift and lets the silence breathe. It's rare, unscripted television, raw emotion in front of millions. Jake continues, almost to himself. You know, every time I sit down for one of these interviews, I tell myself to stay light. Be funny. Be safe. Don't give them anything real, because the moment you do, they'll use it against you. He glances at Sunny. But maybe honesty's worth the risk. Sunny doesn't speak. She's listening now. He goes on. You talk about accountability, and I get that. But maybe what we really need is empathy. Maybe if people stopped judging stories and started listening to them, we'd actually learn something. The audience applauds again, longer this time. Sunny's eyes soften slightly. That's fair, she admits. But empathy without awareness can become ignorance too. Jake smiles faintly. Then maybe we both have homework. The tension breaks. The audience laughs, relieved. Whoopi grins. Now that's the quote they'll use for the promo. Jake chuckles. Good. At least it's not me storming off. But even as the laughter fills the studio again, you can sense something deeper humming beneath it. A mutual recognition. Two people who started as opponents, both realizing they're fighting different sides of the same war. Meaning versus message, art versus activism. The segment is supposed to wrap, but Whoopi signals for one more minute. All right, last question, she says. Jake, after all this, do you still think actors don't have a responsibility for how their work affects people? Jake looks out at the audience, thoughtful now. I think we all do. But responsibility doesn't mean censorship. It means doing your job truthfully and trusting people to handle the truth. Sunny nods, almost imperceptibly. As long as you understand that truth can heal or harm, depending on who holds it. Jake meets her gaze. Maybe that's why we need both kinds of people, storytellers and questioners. Whoopi claps her hands together. Look at that. We've achieved world peace. The audience laughs, but this time it's warm. The cameras zoom out. The tension that once felt like a storm now settles into something calmer. Like the quiet after rain, when you realize nothing's broken, just changed. Off air, as the outro music fades, Jake stands and extends his hand to Sunny. She shakes it firm, professional, but there's something unspoken there. Respect, maybe even understanding. Then, as they walk off the set, a producer whispers to another, "That was the most honest interview we've had in years." But neither Jake nor Sunny hear it. They're both still thinking about the line between performance and truth, and how easily it disappears when someone finally decides to speak without fear. The next morning, the clip was everywhere. The View's bright orange backdrop flashed across millions of screens. Jake Gyllenhaal leaning forward, eyes burning with intensity, Sunny Hostin matching him word for word. No shouting, no walkouts, just a clash of intellect, emotion, and conviction that felt too real for television. Social media turned it into a storm. On X, hashtags like hashtag Jake vs. Sunny, hashtag The View Showdown, and hashtag Truth or Privilege climbed the trending list before noon. Clips were sliced, edited, slowed down. Every look, every pause, every half-smile dissected like evidence in a trial. He owned her. She humbled him. He was gaslighting. She was baiting. The internet couldn't decide what it had witnessed. A fight, a revelation, or something in between. But everyone agreed on one thing. No one had ever seen Jake Gyllenhaal like that before. Entertainment networks replayed the segment on loop. Morning shows debated the debate. One commentator called it a masterclass in cultural collision. Another called it a reminder that celebrity interviews are no longer safe spaces. But behind all the noise, both Jake and Sunny were silent. That night, Jake sat in his New York apartment, lights low, the city humming softly outside his window. His phone buzzed with messages, most from friends saying, "You killed it," or "Damn, that was intense." He didn't respond to any of them. He watched the clip again, not as an actor, but as a man trying to understand what had just happened. He watched Sunny's eyes, sharp, certain, and his own reflection on the screen, looking defensive, even wounded. And for the first time, he realized something that hadn't occurred to him in the heat of the moment. He hadn't gone there to defend art. He'd gone there to defend himself. He muttered under his breath. Maybe she was right. Across the city, Sunny Hostin was doing the same thing. Sitting alone in her study, laptop open, the comments section scrolling endlessly beneath a viral clip of her face mid-sentence. She'd been called brave, condescending, fearless, rude. She read a dozen takes before closing the screen. She leaned back, eyes tired but clear, whispering to herself, it wasn't about winning. The next day, The View released a statement on social media thanking Jake for a passionate and insightful conversation. It was brief, carefully worded, but it only fanned the fire. Everyone knew the producers were thrilled. Ratings had spiked, clips had gone viral, and the show's name was back in headlines. But something more meaningful had happened beneath the spectacle. People weren't just gossiping, they were talking. About art, responsibility, masculinity, empathy, media bias. Words that usually got drowned out by celebrity noise. Podcasts debated it. College professors used it in media ethics classes. One student's viral tweet summed it up. It wasn't an interview. It was a mirror. Jake flew to LA 2 days later for his movie premiere. The red carpet was chaos, flashes, reporters shouting, fans calling his name. But every microphone held the same question. What really happened on The View? He smiled faintly, the practiced smile of someone who's been answering questions for 20 years. But this time, the answer came slower, quieter. It was honest, he said. Uncomfortable, maybe, but honest. And I think people need more of that. The reporter pressed. Do you regret it? Jake shook his head. No, you can't regret the truth. That clip, just 6 seconds long, exploded online again. Meanwhile, Sunny addressed it days later during another episode. The audience was tense, waiting for a follow-up, but she kept it measured. I think it's good when conversations make people uncomfortable, she said. That's how we grow. I respect Jake. I respect anyone who's willing to have a real conversation on live television. Whoopi, ever the steady hand, grinned. We should frame that quote. The crowd laughed, and for a brief moment it felt like closure. But beneath the laughter, something had changed, both for Jake and for Sunny. Jake, in later interviews, started speaking differently. Not softer, but more aware. He talked about responsibility and art in the same sentence now, admitting that maybe he'd been too defensive before. Sunny, for her part, began framing her questions differently. Less accusatory, more exploratory, as if she'd realized that sometimes the truth needs to be drawn out, not cornered. They hadn't become friends, but they'd become something rarer. Mirrors for each other's blind spots. Months later, when Hollow Point hit theaters, critics praised it not just for the story, but for the performance behind it. One review read, Jake Gyllenhaal brings a new kind of vulnerability to the screen. Not the pain of his characters, but the weight of being human in public. When asked about that quote during a podcast, Jake smiled and said, maybe Sunny Hostin deserves some credit for that. The host laughed. So no hard feelings? Jake thought for a moment. No, just hard truths. And somewhere, watching from her office, Sunny smiled. The clip that once divided millions had done something unexpected. It reminded people that confrontation doesn't have to end in chaos. Sometimes it leads to clarity. By the time the next season of The View aired, their exchange had become part of daytime TV lore. The day a Hollywood star and a journalist cracked open a conversation bigger than either of them. The internet had moved on, as it always does. But the moment stayed, echoing quietly in rewatches and think pieces, in classrooms and conversations, long after the outrage died. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning the argument. It was about daring to have it. And that's the kind of story that never really ends. So what do you think? Was Jake defending art, or himself? Was Sunny exposing hypocrisy, or just pushing too far? Let us know your thoughts down below. Don't forget to hit subscribe to Prime Narrator, like this video, and share it with someone who loves a real story. Not the kind that's scripted, but the kind that reveals what happens when truth collides with pride on live television. Because sometimes the most powerful moments aren't acted,